Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're talking about reading comprehension. This video is going to cover a few things. First, what is reading comprehension? The second, how do we increase reading comprehension in our students and in ourselves? And the third part is going to be about how do we answer those questions on our certification exams that have to do with reading comprehension. Let's get started. All right, so first things first, what is reading comprehension? Well, reading comprehension is when we are engaging in text and we are forming pictures in our minds. We're visualizing what is happening in the story. We're predicting what might happen next. If you're ever reading a story or an article and you think, I bet this is what happens next, or I wonder what's going to happen if this character does this. That's all reading comprehension. We're going beyond just reading the words on the page, and we are actually forming questions in our mind, predicting what's going to happen next, those pictures that we generate in our mind. Like for me, whenever I read a novel, it typically takes place in Massachusetts, where I'm from, in some of these old houses that I visited over the years in my life. So I live in Florida now, but I was born in Massachusetts and my entire family lives there. And most of my family has these old houses from I don't even know, the 1800s, 1700s. And whenever I read a novel that's kind of set in that time period, or whenever I read a novel that has, something around a house or something like that, I visualize my aunt's house. It's so weird. It's kind of like my go-to for stories, and that might happen to you too. And so what we're kind of doing is we're taking our prior knowledge and our prior experiences and our lives, and we're kind of intermingling those with the stories we read. And we're coming up with images in our heads of what's going on in the story. And so it's super nuanced. It's really complicated. And there are things we can do to increase it. But we have to understand as teachers that building that comprehension is complicated. And in order for students to gain that comprehension and to be able to visualize it and put those pictures in their minds and things like that, they first have to have a lot of prerequisite skills. So obviously, they need to have phonological and phonemic awareness, which I talk about a lot in my videos, and you can watch those. I'll link them up here. And so that's sounds only. Then we move into phonics, which is word recognition, understanding, how to decode words. That's not comprehension. That's actually looking at a word and decoding it. Then we move into fluency, and fluency is going to support comprehension, because the more fluently we can move through a passage, the better we can comprehend it. For example, if I'm struggling on my fluency to read strings of words, right? So let's say I'm reading a paragraph and I'm having to stop and decode every other word. All of my cognitive energy is going to sounding out the word, and it's not going to the reading comprehension piece. We only have so much cognitive energy. And if I'm spending it on decoding every single word in a passage, I don't have that cognitive energy to form those pictures in my mind and things like that. So that's why we want to work on fluency to get kids really moving through those passages and working through that so that they can then have that freed up cognitive energy to do the comprehension. And of course, with fluency comes vocabulary. So not only reading those longer strings of words, those paragraphs, but also being able to understand the vocabulary rather quickly. So as you read a sentence, the words in the sentence mean something, obviously. And if we have the good vocabulary, we're just kind of cooking and moving through those passages. And then we get to the essence of reading, which is comprehension. So we're putting all of those skills together to get to comprehension. And again, it's very nuanced, and we all have different ways in comprehending. Like I mentioned before, I have specific pictures in my mind. You probably have specific pictures in your mind when you read. And because we are fluent readers, we have that cognitive energy freed up to build those images and build those scenarios and predict and summarize and things like that, all on the fly. And it's happening without us even knowing it. So the first thing I talked about, obviously, was the fluency piece. We want to make sure that we're building strong automaticity, automatic reading, and fluency. And this comes with practice. Now, obviously, they have to have the prereqs, right? They got to have the phonemic and phonological awareness, and they have to have the phonics. But then once they get that, they need to practice reading. And I tell other people this as well, who contact us and say, hey, I'm having a really hard time with the reading comprehension. What do I do? The only way to get better at reading comprehension, especially if you already have the skills, the phonics skills, the phonological awareness, the fluency, and the vocab, is to read more frequently. Because reading is like a muscle. It's like when you are trying to get better at running. If you want to run a marathon, you start running 3 miles, then you run 5 miles, then you run 10 miles. And you don't just do it once every month or once every 5 weeks. You're doing it every single day to build up the endurance. Reading is very similar. You'll notice that if you don't read for a long time and then you pick something up to read, you're kind of choppy and it doesn't really flow very well. That's because your reading muscle is lacking. But once you start reading a few more articles, you'll feel yourself kind of pick up the pace and read more fluently through the piece. That's why in order to increase reading comprehension, we need to work on those fluency skills and that automaticity. So how can we do that? Well, we can have students read and reread passages over and over again. That's called repeated reading. That builds up those fluency skills. Why is that important? Well, it does two things. First, it increases their accuracy and their rate in reading, but it also builds confidence. You know, they might read through a passage the first time and it's not going so well. They're stopping at every word. They read it again, they get a little bit better. They read it again, they get much better. So that confidence increases. Also, when they've got that fluency and that repeated reading, now they're freeing up that cognitive demand on their brains. Now they can use some of that cognitive energy on the comprehension, right? We also want to work on metacognition, which is teaching students how to use their brains. So we take this for granted as adults. We know how to use our brains, right? When we see a difficult word, we kind of read around the word. We might, look it up, but typically we're not going to look up a word when we're reading a newspaper article or something like that. We're going to try to figure it out. We might use other comprehension strategies in order to figure out what we're reading. Students don't know how to do that yet. And so we need to teach them how to do that. So one way that I find very helpful is to do like a read aloud, think aloud. So this entails me reading aloud to students, right? And when I get to a difficult word, I might say, that word looks weird. Let me sound that out. And then I'll sound it out in front of the kids. And I'm talking through this whole process so they can see me like working through my brain. And then I'll say, okay, let me read around that word. Let me see if I can figure that out. And I'm talking out my process to the students. That is going to increase metacognition, which they can then apply when they are reading. Now, comprehension, metacognition, predicting, summarizing, these are all high-level skills. This is all critical thinking. And it's very important that we foster these critical thinking skills so that students can get better at their reading comprehension. If students are just reading through passages really, really quickly, and I'm sure you have some students like that, right? They start and they want to get through it as quickly as possible because they think if they read fast, they look smart in front of the other kids, right? But what that does is they're missing some of those nuances and the punctuation and some of the things that help us comprehend text. Punctuation is a big part of comprehension. When there's a pause, when there's a period, when there's a question mark, when there's an exclamation point, those types of punctuation marks really help us to understand what's happening in the text. And so there's all these different things happening when it comes to comprehension, and it's really important that we're fostering that. So 2 ways to increase comprehension. Number 1, fluency. Practice that fluency, repeated reading, reading over and over again, practice. Reading takes practice. There is no silver bullet. We have to keep reading and rereading. And then, of course, metacognition, doing some read aloud, think alouds, showing students how to use their brains. Now, I'll say one thing about the practice part as well. If you are someone who struggles with reading comprehension and you have a hard time with reading comprehension exams, perhaps the ACT, the SAT, the Praxis, whatever it is, you should read more, because the more you read, the better you're going to get. And so that's really, really important for our students, but it's also important for us. We are in the land of scrolling quickly. I mean, even if a video is more than 1 minute long, it's like too long for us. We have to find a video that's 15 seconds or 20 seconds. That is really hurting our cognitive endurance, because part of the cognitive endurance is staying in the reading even when it gets laborious, even when it gets difficult. We have to learn to stay in it, just like running. We might be 5-6 miles in and going, oh, I can't do it. We have to have the endurance to stay in the game in order to push through. So I equate running and reading together a lot because I love both of those things, but I also find a lot of similarities there. And the endurance is really important. We have to build that endurance in our students and in ourselves. Now, when it comes to the teacher certification exams, there are some keywords you can be looking for in the answer choices when it comes to comprehension. And this will also help you with the constructed response. So you might get questions, big, long scenario questions about reading comprehension. You know, I always talk about working backwards. So make sure you check out that video and I'll link it up here. So we want to read those answer choices first and find some keywords in there that might bring us to the correct answer. So if the question is about reading comprehension, we want to look for answer choices that have to do with questioning, predicting, summarizing, metacognition, right? Because those are the skills we use in comprehension. Questioning is a big part of reading comprehension. Sometimes we'll generate questions before we read to kind of get ourselves in the process of understanding the purpose for reading. We might question during reading. We might have a question session. We might read a paragraph and say, what questions do you have so far? That gauges reading comprehension because if students are understanding the text, they can start to generate questions. So that's really important. And then we might have questioning after the reading is done. So what questions do you have? We might answer some comprehension questions. So questioning and comprehension go together hand in hand. And again, we do these things in our minds as adults without even thinking about it. We're constantly questioning in our mind going, I wonder what that means. I wonder why he did that. We want to bring that out of students and talk that out through questioning techniques, metacognition exercises, and read aloud, think alouds, things like that. Another thing you should be looking at in the answer choices on your exam are things like predicting and summarizing. These are comprehension skills. I mentioned them earlier. When you can kind of predict what's going to happen in the next scene of a book or in the next scene of a story, or maybe you're predicting based on a newspaper article, maybe it's something about international relations or war or something like that, you might predict, I bet this country is going to get involved, or I bet this person's not going to be happy about that. That is all coming from comprehension. So you might be looking in the answer choices for things like having students predict, having students come up with alternate endings of the story. Those are all prediction strategies, higher level, critical thinking strategies, and they go hand in hand with comprehension as well. Now, another skill that goes along with reading comprehension is summarizing. If after you read a paragraph or a story and you have students kind of put their hand over it, and you might say, okay, with your shoulder partner, summarize what you just read, that is going to help with comprehension. So if you see the term summarizing or paraphrasing in an answer choice that has to do with comprehension, that is most likely your correct answer. Another word in the answer choices that you want to look for is summarizing. Summarizing is when we can paraphrase what we've read. Well, we have to comprehend what we read in order to summarize it. So if you see the word summarizing in an answer choice, that's probably going to be the correct answer when it comes to comprehension. Now, also apply this to your constructed response. You might be taking a reading exam, like the Teaching Reading 5205 or 5206, and you might be asked about comprehension. The students might be struggling with that, and it might say, identify 2 strategies you can use to increase students' comprehension. Well, right away, questioning and metacognition. Boom. Increase student questioning. Maybe you're using graphic organizers in the beginning to help, organize their questions. Perhaps you're doing questioning techniques before, during, and after reading. These are quick things you can use during your constructed response in order to answer those properly. And then, of course, metacognition, using read aloud, think aloud. Apply that to your constructed response. Just a quick description of the strategy. I'm going to read aloud. I'm going to think out my process to the students. Then we're going to read together. They can think out their process to their shoulder partners. You can kind of structure it any way you want, but using metacognition and questioning techniques when you are answering those constructed response is very important. You could also use prediction. You could also use summarization. Just depends on what you're most comfortable with when writing an essay. Now, if you're studying for the Praxis 5205 or the 5206, we have lots of resources for that. And if you're studying for any reading exam, our resources will help you. Let me show you where to get those. Okay, just hop over to Kathleen Jasper kathleenjasper.com, and you can go over here into our programs, Praxis Teaching Reading. And when you do, you'll see all of our reading programs here. We have the 5205 and an online course for that. And we just published the 5206. This is the K through 12 reading. The 5205 is the elementary ed reading. When you click that, it'll take you to the product page. You can have a look at all the different questions that people ask us about the 5205. Is this the best study guide? Does it contain practice tests? And you can go through those frequently asked questions. You can purchase it digitally. So when you purchase from our website, it comes in a digital download emailed to you that you can access on your device. We do not recommend printing it because it's going to cost a lot of money to print it using your own ink and your own paper. This is like a 200-page book. So if you want it digitally to look on your device, which some people prefer, you can definitely buy it here and use Adobe to highlight and write notes in it and things like that. If you prefer a physical copy, go ahead and click this Amazon link here. It'll take you here. You can see we have over 197 ratings, 5-star reviews, and this will bring you a physical book. So don't print it. If you want a physical book, buy it through Amazon and it'll be sent to you within a couple of days. Okay. You can check out our ratings there. We also have a ton of ratings for this book, and you can see lots of 5-star. People love our teaching reading program. And so that is something you can look into. We also just published the 5206. So if you're someone who has to take the K-12, this is the book for you. And again, digital download to your device or a physical copy on Amazon here. All right, so I hope that helps you today with your reading comprehension questions, how to increase it with your students, and also how to get better at it ourselves. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments below. Please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and giving this a thumbs up if you found it helpful. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.